It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway, just a group of old friends, some beers, and a few days away from the grind of work and life. They hadn't seen each other in years. College had scattered them like seeds in the wind, but this weekend, they'd all agreed to meet at the old summer camp on the edge of the woods, a place they'd once spent long, lazy summers. No one had been there in over a decade. The place was forgotten by most, abandoned and falling apart. But to them it was full of memories, of campfires and midnight swims, of secrets and laughter. At least that's how they remembered it. When they arrived, the camp looked just as they'd expected, run down with peeling paint and broken windows, the cabins crooked and sagging. Nature had already begun to reclaim the place, vines crawling over the wooden structures, trees growing too close, their branches scraping the rooftops like fingers. But it felt familiar, comforting even, until the sun dipped below the horizon and night wrapped the camp in a thick, oppressive darkness. The fire pit was still there, a circle of stone in the middle of the clearing, where they sat around a crackling fire, roasting marshmallows, laughing about old times. It felt like nothing had changed. But there was an unease in the air, a strange tension that none of them could name. Maybe it was just the unfamiliar silence of the place, or the creeping feeling that the forest around them was watching. But as the night deepened, they all felt it, the pull of something darker lurking just beyond the glow of their campfire. That was when it started. A soft sound at first, a whimper, like the sound of an animal in pain. Then a low, mournful cry. It echoed through the trees, coming from deep in the woods. They all stopped talking, turning their heads toward the sound. It wasn't a wolf or a coyote or any animal they knew. It sounded like a woman crying.
It's probably just some animal, a deer or something.
But there was no mistaking the sound. The cry was human, and it was close.
Maybe we should check it out,
Kyle said, his voice shaky. He was the one always up for an adventure, the one who'd convinced them all to come here in the first place. But now he seemed more uneasy than usual.
No, it's too late. We should just stay here.
But none of them could shake the feeling that they needed to know what was causing the cry. And so, reluctantly, they decided to go into the woods. It felt like the pull of something they couldn't explain, something they couldn't fight. It wasn't just curiosity. It was like the woods themselves were drawing them in. They grabbed flashlights, their beams flickering as they walked into the dark forest, the sound of the woman sobbing growing louder with every step. It seemed to be leading them, guiding them deeper into the trees. No one spoke, the weight of the air around them pressing down, thick with tension. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a clearing. In the middle, hidden among the trees, was something none of them expected, an old cabin. It wasn't part of the camp. They all remembered the camp's layout. This wasn't supposed to be here. The building was run down, much like the rest of the camp, but it was different. There was something about it that felt wrong. The crying was louder now, sharper, like someone was right behind them.
That's where it's coming from,
Kyle whispered, pointing to the cabin. They all stood frozen for a moment, caught between fear and fascination.
We have to check it out. We can't just leave.
Reluctantly, the others followed. They approached the door, which hung loosely on its hinges, and as they stepped inside, the air grew colder. The smell of rot filled their nostrils. The walls were covered in old, faded pictures, some of them torn or burned, the faces obscured by time. The only sound now was the soft rustling of wind through the cracks in the walls. Then, the crying started again. It was louder this time, coming from below. There was a trapdoor in the far corner of the room, half hidden beneath the floorboards. Dylan, the most practical of them all, approached it cautiously, his hand trembling as he lifted the heavy wood. What they found underneath would haunt them forever. A narrow, dark staircase led down into the earth. The cries of the woman came from below, desperate and filled with pain. As they hesitated, unsure of what to do, the darkness seemed to swallow the light of their flashlights. Something shifted in the air. Something old. Something angry.
Should we go down?
No, Dylan said, but his voice cracked. He wasn't sure why he said it. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was instinct. But it was too late to turn back now. They descended. The basement was damp, the air thick with the scent of mildew and earth. But there was something else in the air, too. Something alive, something dark. And that's when they saw it. There was a wall at the end of the basement, a wall covered in strange symbols scratched into the stone. At the center of the wall was an old wooden door, warped and rotting with age. The cries of the woman were now a guttural wail, and as they approached the door, they could feel it. A presence, something watching them, something waiting. Without a word, Kyle reached for the door handle. It creaked open slowly, and when they stepped inside, they found themselves in a room that shouldn't have been there. It was a shrine, an altar of sorts, with candles that had long since burned out. And in the center of the room was a broken, rusted metal cage. Inside the cage was a woman. Her skin was pale, nearly translucent, her hair a wild tangle of knots. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, her mouth open in a silent scream. Her body was twisted, bent at unnatural angles, as if she had been held in that cage for decades. And in her eyes there was something terrible, like the knowledge of 1,000 untold deaths.
Who is she?
But it was Kyle who answered. He'd heard the story before, the story of the camp's dark past, how decades ago the camp had been a place of brutal betrayal, a place of sacrifice. The woman in the cage had once been a camp counselor, one who had been accused of something terrible, something that had led to her own betrayal. She had been locked away, left to die, and her spirit had lingered ever since, calling out for revenge. They had disturbed her. They had awakened her. The cries stopped. The room went deathly still. And then, with a slow, agonizing creak, the woman in the cage began to move. She twisted, her limbs contorting unnaturally as she slowly rose to her feet. And that was when they realized the woman wasn't the only thing trapped in that cage. The darkness that had followed them from the camp was waiting. One by one, the shadows rose from the ground, whispering secrets of betrayal, of sacrifice. They were coming for them, pulling them into the past, into the story of the camp that had never truly ended. And some of them, Dylan thought, as the darkness closed in, might not make it out alive. The Hollow had claimed them,